response to all I had told him. Oh, he thoroughly enjoyed spitting out that line. It was such an obvious and pitiful power grab. I could almost see him puffing up, believing he'd taken the diva down. Not only the tabloids revel in watching stars crash to the ground. I was defenseless, knifed in the back by my ex-husband and stabbed in the heart by my brother and mother. And they all left me to bleed out inside some hellhole. I went to try and sign myself out, but to my horror, I discovered that I couldn't. I don't know what my brother told the staff, but people were treating me like I was out of control and out of my mind, and most seemed to be enjoying it. It took several days of red tape and paperwork to get out. I knew Morgan and my mother had been communicating, and I strongly believed they orchestrated the whole thing. I returned to the scene of no crime, my mother's house, my house. Coincidentally, there were paparazzi waiting in the woods to greet me. The cover of the next day's New York Post was a photo of me, shot with a long lens through the trees in pajamas with little dark sunglasses and a messy bun, sipping juice through a straw. The photo was emblazoned with a giant caption, "World exclusive, Mariah, the first photos." My mother was thrilled. She exclaimed, "Look, it's just like Marilyn." It was not. The Daily News cover even gave her a mention, Mariah's crack-up, mother's desperate 911 call as diva unraveled. When I went back to the house to retrieve my things with my road manager, my mother, in a drab house dress, was sitting on the floor of the porch in the rain, playing jacks in what appeared to be a trance. It kind of freaked my road manager out. What pathetic irony. Her glee at the tabloid coverage was no surprise to me. Even though I was the child who didn't break the rules, or laws, or bottles, my mother didn't seem to have the capacity to fully celebrate me as I matured into an accomplished artist. Sometimes I wondered if she couldn't even tolerate my achievements. I often felt like there was an undertow of jealousy pulling on her smile, though I still included her in many of the major events in my life. One of the greatest honors of my career was receiving the Congressional Award. I dreamed of receiving Grammys and Oscars for music or acting, but to be honored by my country for my service to others was a distinction beyond even my dreams, and I dream big. I was the recipient of the 1999 Horizon Award, which is given for charitable work focused on promoting personal development in young people for my work with Camp Mariah through the Fresh Air Fund. I'd never been deeply involved in politics, and at the time, I really didn't fully understand the significance of the award and the event. It's one of only 2 medals legislated by a congressional act, the other being the Medal of Honor. I was being honored along with former Secretary of State Colin Powell. We were hosted like dignitaries, and there was a very elegant, formal sit-down dinner before the ceremony. My mother and I were in high-powered, bipartisan company, including Tom Selleck, former Republican Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott from Mississippi, and former Democratic House Minority Leader Dick Gephardt, who ran for president a couple of times. This is one of the few events where both political parties put politics aside and proudly participate equally as Americans. On this night, in a room full of politicians, it's understood no one discusses politics. Even I know that. I was proud that a little girl who grew up feeling like an outcast now had an honored seat at one of the most esteemed tables in the world. I had my mother all dolled up, hair, nails, professional makeup. I bought her a new fancy dress, the whole 9. This was an occasion to look our best and be on our best behavior. Well, she had a few cocktails on the short plane ride from New York to Washington, D.C., and continued to booze it on up during the dinner. As the effects of the drinks kicked in, her decorum slipped away. She began to theatrically express her political opinions, which you absolutely don't do at a distinguished event like this, even stone cold sober. Her thoughts descended into insults which melted down into a small but disturbing tirade. The one thing everyone knew not to do was what my mother was now fully engaged in. I was mortified. My security leaned over and whispered, "We have to get her out of here." I agreed. They whisked her out of the dining area and hid her in my dressing room near the stage for the award ceremony, apparently just in time, because it was reported to me that when she got into the room, she started yelling, "I hate Mariah! I hate my daughter!" When I escaped from the dinner table to go and check on her, she was completely sloshed. I slid back to my seat and cheerfully performed as if all were well. Lord knows I've had lots of practice. I was escorted to the stage, accompanied by two beautiful young black women from the Fresh Air Fund, who thankfully anchored me in the purpose of the evening. I managed to make it through my speech and accept the award. When I got off stage, it was clear we had to get my irate and inebriated mother out of the venue fast, as she was now throwing a full-blown fit. My security worked swiftly to get her into the car, to the airport, and on the plane. On the flight, still decked out in the designer dress I had bought her, she slinked into her first-class seat, continuing to drink and drone. "Morgan is the only one I love. Morgan is the only one who loves me." Security got my mother safely home and poured her into her bed. Alone in the back of a limo, in my black silk gown, hugging an award from my country, I cried. She may have been in a blackout and unaware of what she did or said, but I had to process the sadness, embarrassment, and pain of the experience. The next morning, I was nervous her booze-induced performance would make it into the press, but it didn't. I had protected her. I don't know who saw her, but mercifully, her congressional calamity did not make it into the tabloids. She didn't call to apologize. She didn't say anything. Being Mariah Carey is a job, my job, and I had to get back to it. I knew there would be eyes and lenses everywhere. I needed someone to light the way out of the darkness that place had become. By that time, I trusted only a handful of people, so before I was able to see my way out of the shadowy cabin in the woods, I called on my trusted friend and anchor, makeup artist Christopher Buckle, for support. He lifted me up, reapplied my protective public face, and walked with me into the sunlight. I was wounded, but I got myself back to my penthouse in Manhattan. There was so much recovery and repair to be done. I was still quite fragile, very concerned with the condition of my very new, very big deal at Virgin, and a very short time away from the release of Glitter. The coverage of my, quote, crack-up had everybody understandably shook, not least of all me. I had not regained my emotional or spiritual strength. I was still very much inside the nightmare, and Morgan was still very much in control. But I didn't see him as a puppeteer just yet. I still held a desperate, distorted trust in him. He had snapped me out of my screaming fit at the hotel by saying birthdays at Roy Boy's. He was not in sight when the cops came in Westchester. He had ridden with me to the spa, so I didn't associate him with the current collection of catastrophes. He seemed at best an ally, at worst an innocent bystander. I needed someone, and I needed to believe that not everyone was against me. The pedestal I'd erected for my brother when I was a little girl had long since been reduced to rubble, but I kept trying to place him back on top of it. Though I could not see it then, we were clearly in ruins. If I had had my wits about me, or if someone on my payroll had known better, I would have had a team of specialists and professionals lined up to evaluate and treat me at my home. I did have the wherewithal to want to tuck myself away at an actual spa for a few days, where at least I could get some rest, wholesome food, maybe some body treatments, all the things I'd wanted on my way to that first hellish spa. I also wanted the opportunity to clear my head and protect myself and the label from more salacious headlines. Morgan recommended I go to Los Angeles, where he was currently living, making the case that there were actual spas there, true, and no New York newspapers, also true. A spa in LA seemed like a good idea at the time. I allowed Morgan to make the arrangements, not a good idea at any time, but I was desperate. When we got to LA, my anxiety and disorientation was intensified by the tragedy of Aaliyah's sudden and horrific death. Just a few days earlier, she had told the press, "I know this business can be difficult. It can be stressful. Much love to Mariah Carey. I hope she gets better soon." The entire music industry was rocked by her death, but the R&B and hip-hop community was devastated. She was indeed our little princess. So much was happening, and I couldn't fully understand the magnitude of the damage being done to me. Morgan hooked up with some random guy who he said would be helping us. I remember driving around on the highway for what seemed like an eternity. We finally stopped at a place that did not look like a spa at all, but rather a detox facility. I was still in the hold of extreme exhaustion, so while I wasn't thrilled, I didn't resist. Morgan even went so far as to say, "Come on, it'll be fun." It was not fun. It was one of the most harrowing times of my life, and I had seen some times. Once more, I didn't have control of the situation. I could not speak up for myself, and when I could, I was ignored and overpowered. The facility in LA turned out to be a hardcore detox and rehab center. The first thing that happened to me was they administered drugs, heavy, hard narcotics. They were giant horse pills the color of Pepto-Bismol. At first, I refused to take them, but I didn't have the drive to fully fight. I was so weak. I thought maybe I would just be able to get a little sleep. Where was the Ambien when a girl needed it? Eventually, I did sleep, but fitfully. The drugs blocked me from whatever energy and will to fight I had in reserve. They put my big, bright God further in the shadows. They made me sluggish, puffy, and compliant. I was in a fog much of the time. Frumpily ensconced in some piece of shit, hideous institutional ensemble, I was drained and my soul was heavy. My face was vulnerable and hadn't had any protection in many days. That's one function of makeup. Even while giving a natural look, it can serve as war paint, an invisible force field. It often does for me. It shields me from people literally getting into my pores and under my skin, but I had no such protection in that place. One morning, I was in my bleak room, feeling drowsy, when an attendant came and brought me into the common area. It was crowded with staff and patients, and all were staring up at the large television in silence. On the screen was what looked like the view from the kitchen window in my New York City penthouse in the sky. But the picture was framed in chalky gray clouds of smoke. Orange and red fireballs were shooting out from the top of the glistening silver twin towers like meteors against a vibrant blue sky. Then the proud, monumental buildings crumbled from within. One at a time, they came crashing down in excruciatingly slow motion. The effects of the drugs I'd been kept on were no match for the shock I was experiencing. In that instance, I was stone-cold alert as I watched my majestic skyline disintegrate. My home city was burning and collapsing, and I was thousands of miles away, locked inside a dismal detox, drugged, devastated, and alone. I was frozen, eyes locked on the horror unfolding before me, when someone from the staff tapped me on my shoulder. They told me it was being reported that terrorists had attacked the World Trade Center and that they would now be releasing me. I was free to go. Miraculously, it seemed, I was no longer in need of containment or sedatives. I was no longer crazy and out of control. So I was magically good to go because terrorists had attacked America and a cracked-up diva wasn't interesting anymore. Hello? But I didn't ask questions. I felt like the world was coming to an end for all of us, and if it was the end, I wanted to get the fuck out of there. Between being there, getting out, and the chaos and terror of the attacks back home, I didn't even realize it was the day the Glitter soundtrack was scheduled for release. The coincidence of my sudden release from rehab and the release of the Glitter soundtrack and the 9/11 attacks was haunting. You know how in a sci-fi horror film, the apocalypse happens and then there's a lone survivor wandering around surveying the devastation? That was me on that warm and cloudy day in LA on September 11th, 2001. I walked out of detox pumped full of toxins. The city of LA was solid, but I was shaky. I felt alone, untethered, and out of my body. I got myself to a hotel and had the first uninterrupted rest I'd had in weeks. With the tiny bit of strength that rest provided, I was able to finally get to an actual spa because I still had to do the best I could to prepare for the Glitter movie premiere, which was now only 10 days away. It was a blur, but I pulled myself together. I got some highlights, a cut, and a blowout. I wore a one-shoulder fitted tank top, as I do on the Glitter poster, but it had an American flag bedazzled on the front in honor of the victims and heroes. I paired it with simple low-rise jeans, held my chin high, and hit the red carpet at the Village Theater in Westwood with a smile. I was blessed to have lots of kids and young people at the premiere, as they were the intended audience. Glitter was not made for serious cinema-goers and art gallery hoppers. It was an imperfect, fun, PG flick. The box office sales for Glitter were dismal, in large part because the country was still reeling from the 9/11 attacks. The tragedy was still fresh, and no one was ready for the lightweight distraction that was Glitter. Out of respect for our collective mourning, one would think the media would have turned their obsession away from me as well, but it seemed to only intensify. After the Glitter premiere, I stayed in LA to prepare for America, a Tribute to Heroes telethon, honoring the thousands who died in the attacks. Organized by George Clooney, it would be my first performance since I emerged from that nightmare of family, cops, and institutions. The biggest stars in entertainment, Tom Hanks, Goldie Hawn, Bruce Springsteen, Stevie Wonder, Muhammad Ali, Pearl Jam, Paul Simon, Billy Joel, Robert De Niro, and others, came out united as Americans. I sang Hero as Americans, first responders, and so many other brave, unnamed people showed the world what true heroes really look like. Never had I imagined when I wrote this song that it would mean so much in such a horrific moment in history. I was anxious to get back to New York. It was inspiring how the city immediately got to work putting its